Wow, I don't think our technology is working properly. Was it glitching for you, Orla?
It looked beautiful to me.
But could you hear the sound?
Yeah.
And it was moving through. Okay, over here it wasn't. My camera kept glitching, so I don't know if I turned the timer off like early, but here we are.
It was
We are in
perfect.
the group again.
That was
We're
very
about
nice.
to start. Well, welcome, Orla. We are so excited. I am so excited to have you here today. And I've gotten a few private messages this week that were a couple that were intrigued about you being here and a couple that were really excited about you being here. And then there are some women in the program that I'm running, and we just went through our intergenerational section of the program who are so excited that this is happening right now. Like the timing is just perfect. So for everyone who does not know who Orla Collins is, she is an amazing human being. Her and I went through the Martha Beck life coaching course together a couple of years ago, which is a really deep program that creates wonderful coaches. And she is also a Reiki practitioner. And I had all these things that I thought I might say about her, but then I came across this piece of writing that she wrote. And so I'm going to read it, but this is actually from her words. And this is going to be your introduction. Okay, Orla?
Okay.
And then you can have the floor. So I found this that Orla wrote, and I'm going to read it to you from her words. There will always be times when you need to speak to your mom, a nurturing, non-judgmental woman who listens to you without an agenda. However, not everyone was born to a woman who is available to them physically, emotionally, or spiritually. But the need to be heard, really heard, and emotionally held by a matriarchal figure, that never goes away. And that's where I come in, Orla, not me. I provide a space for wisdom, healing, maternal magic, healing energy work, and a healthy dose of humor. A gentle, magical, and very maternal energy helps to heal physical and emotional distress that shows up in all of our lives. It is caused by the psychological slights and wounds that we're unable to tend to when we were younger. And they are crying out loud to be looked after now. This can show up in a number of ways. Having difficult with boundaries, being unable to say no to other people, looking after everyone and neglecting yourself, feeling like you're not quite enough, deeply buried in anger and resentment, guilt and shame, and a feeling that you can never change the situation. I do this work because 15 years ago I would have loved to have someone or somewhere to go to learn about my constant need to look after everyone else, causing chronic health conditions that I tried to ignore. I know how awfully painful it is to feel your value is in what you do rather than who you are, to feel that you can never change your life, even as that life and the people in it slowly leach the spirit out of you, your spirit out of you. That's why I do maternal energy work. That's why I do the maternal energy work that I do. I know that you are lovely, delightful, and worthy just because you exist. And I want you to truly see and believe that too. Bring the things that you really need to talk about, the hard things you want someone to listen to, the things that you might be tempted to keep in the dark, all while knowing that the monsters are under the bed are better faced head on with someone who will encourage you to turn on the flashlight. I can't promise you cookies and milk, she says, but I can offer you a warm, nurturing space where you can be emotionally held and listened to deeply. I'm a graduate of the Martha Beck Wayfinder Life Course training program and a Reiki practitioner. In my early 20s, I was a Montessori teacher. I live in Toronto with my husband, our 3 children, and our first dog, Moya. I love a well-made cup of tea, which she has today with her beautiful peacock cup, chilled bubbly and peonies. I still speak with an Irish accent, swear occasionally, and I'm grateful every day for the work that I get to do and the clients that trust me to help them dissolve unhealthy, inherited patterns and become the women that they were born to be. I love that, Orla. This floor is yours.
Thank you so much for having me. I'm delighted. I'm delighted to be here. I'm delighted that menopause is now something that can be talked about as opposed to something whispered. I remember my childhood, just, you'd hear that word, the change. And like, it sounded terrifying. If it needed to be whispered like that in yeah, in those hushed tones. So this is great. Kylie and I were just saying this is a great generation to be in because it's out there, and it's great that we have people who are bringing it out into the open and treating it as a normal stage of life.
Mm-hmm.
It's really a gift. So thank you, Kylie, for that.
Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
And same for your work. Speaking about intergenerational patterns and the things that are passed down in menopause. And like we just said when we were here a few minutes before the call, it's such a great time to be alive that these things are out in the open.
Yes, yes. And that we feel empowered to actually change what life is going to be like for our grandchildren and great-grandchildren because of the work that we are doing on ourselves now. You know, sometimes if you look at it, you might be going, oh my God, like, oh, every word that comes out of my mouth, I need to watch. But I think in general, actually, again, it is a gift that we're learning the tools that we can use to heal ourselves, and that becomes the way our children and grandchildren and great-grandchildren learn. So I always say that for me, I had to learn a lot of the language. I was very lucky because my mother is by nature a gentle person, but I still had to relearn a lot of language that I would have heard used on children growing up. And my goal is for us to learn the language, the way we speak to ourselves, to relearn that, so that our great-grandchildren, or maybe even our children, it becomes their mother tongue. Does that make sense? Did I jump right into?
Yeah, no, that makes sense. I love that you're jumping right in. It makes sense, and it's so important.
So I think what happens for a lot of women is we grew up hearing our mothers, our aunts, grandmothers, neighbors, the women in the shop. You heard language being used and women speaking about themselves. Now, you know, it's slightly different in North America, but in Ireland, women hate taking compliments. It's considered nearly rude to somebody says your dress looks lovely. The answer is supposed to be, oh, this old thing, oh, this is old, you know, it's old, or I got it cheap, or what have you, instead of thank you. That's considered a little bit out there. You're thinking a bit too much about yourself to just accept a compliment. And that could just be, you know, that could just be a quirk, but it's actually more than that. And I do see it here in North America too, is women feeling their bodies don't quite measure up, or their houses don't quite measure up, or their lifestyle, or their whatever, they already say jobs. And women putting themselves down, particularly body images. Yeah, I notice that a lot with my clients. And I hear them say things like, oh, but my daughter is beautiful, and I don't want her to ever think there's anything wrong with her body. But of course, your daughter is not listening to what you say to her. She is listening to what you say to yourself.
Mm-hmm.
And that's what I think is really important, is to retrain ourselves so that we don't speak about ourselves as if we are less than or not enough. And that when our children hear us speak like that about ourselves, they realize that would be the way they can speak about themselves.
Yeah.
So that's, well, it's part of why I am so passionate about this work.
Sorry. Sorry about that.
Oh, it's okay. But
yeah, it is so important. And you're right. They don't listen to what you say. They do as you do, not as you say. And we do. We think, I can remember thinking how beautiful everyone in the world is. I can look at anybody and I can see beauty in those people. But to look at myself in the mirror it's like a battle, and those thoughts, they have been passed down. And yeah, it's really important, because then I'm passing it down to my daughter too. And I've spent a lot of years on that type of work. And oh, thank goodness there is coaches out there like you and I who help people to retrain that, because it's not even our fault. It's just built in.
So built in. And built in for generation upon generation upon generation, for women having to not, if you're in a situation, and again, I go back to Ireland and England, but if you're in a situation where you were somewhat owned by the person who owned the land, then it makes sense that women would go, no, I'm not attractive at all. Do not look at me. So you can see where it's coming from. And I don't think we're not blaming our mothers or our grandmothers for this.
No.
But we are seeing that it's unhealthy.
Yes.
And that we get to dissolve that.
Yes.
And change the way we treat ourselves, thereby allowing our children treat themselves differently. And when, triple great grandchildren are born, they're looking back at these ancestors who have changed how women look and treat themselves and change their lives.
And they might not even know, because
No.
it will just be the way that it is. And I love that you mentioned the part about being owned, because it's not so long ago that women were property, that women didn't have the rights. And it's new. It's all new. And what was passed on to us, we can have compassion for what they were going through, and that some of that was passed down as not their fault.
Yeah. But we're allowed to change it, or I should say, and we're allowed to change it. We don't have to own that as the way forward. And it's not, I'm saying that as if you can just wake up in the morning and go, oh, do you know what? I'm just going to treat myself very nicely now. Like, it's not like that. It does require I was going to say effort and work, but no, what it really requires is bravery. It requires courage to look into yourself and bring out the thoughts. I think one of the huge emotions that we're now looking at, I think we've Brené Brown on the vanguard for all of this. But shame is, it's a really, really interesting emotion.
It is.
Actually hard to say, I'm ashamed of myself for. You'll say, I'm sorry I did that, or that wasn't right, or I don't like the way I spoke to you. But it's very hard to say, I am ashamed of the way I spoke to you. And I won't be doing that again. Like it's a hard emotion. And yet, if you as a person, and generally maybe more so for women, if you don't feel that you're enough just as is, there's shame attached to that. Nobody sits down with their friend over a glass of wine and goes, you know what I'd love to talk about today? How much I'm ashamed of not being. And so that's what I mean about courage, because it takes a lot of courage to say to someone else, my only value is in what I do. My only value is in my role as wife, mother, employee, daughter, whatever. And yet, it's only when you verbalize it that you can see. And I'm going to say, particularly when you verbalize it and you have it witnessed by somebody who can sit and listen to you say it and allow you go through the thought process. Because, of course, all your friends are going to say, yes, you are enough, you're great, But for this word to happen, we have to come to the conclusion. We have to hit down into the nugget that goes, I'd say, yes, of course. my value is not in who and what I do and my roles. It's just because I'm here.
Yeah. And you're right, there is those two pieces to it. Not only is it the courage of you having to get past that barrier of saying, I'm ashamed of this, but then that second piece of we don't live in a society where we allow space and understanding, and not, again, not our fault. We're not taught that. We're taught to say, oh, no, you're so good at this, you're so good at that. And it doesn't help. We need to have those environments, those people, and I mean, particularly life coaches are great at that, or women's circles where you can have that space to just speak and be actually heard instead of fixed, because you don't need to be fixed. Oh, you give me goosebumps, lady.
I always think it's like, this might sound awful, but it's like you have a cut on your arm and it's kind of a bit gross, but you've covered up with a whole bunch of bandages. If you take off the bandages and you let it out to the light, then it dries up and it's nowhere near as bad.
Mm-hmm.
When you keep all of these thoughts really firmly held down, right, then there's no chance for it to heal.
No.
And I'm also going to say that when you're going through menopause and your hormones are every which way and your temperature fluctuations and what have you, your ability to keep those things tamped down, severely depleted.
Yeah.
You know, I remember my husband at one point saying something like, "You've never said anything like that before." I mean, in my mind going, I think it all the time. I just used to be able to keep my mouth shut. And now I just can't. What you see is what you get. So yeah, I'm a big fan of doing this work. All stars.
Oh, I love that. I love how you just said that, because it's so true. And it scares people because, again, just like not knowing that the emotions that we have inside are like a wound. And if you leave a wound, it's going to fester. Like you break your leg, it ain't going to heal if you ignore it. It ain't going to heal with positive thinking. It's going to heal with the proper care. And it's the same in menopause as it is in shame and intergenerational healing. It's all stuff that needs to be talked about, but also needs to be talked about in a nurturing environment that has the capacity to and the tools to care for it.
Yes. And what I love, as you were saying about coaching, what I love about coaching and when I'm being coached is to be with someone who will let me say whatever. And I know that she's not judging me. She knows it's just a thought that I need to take out and look at.
Yeah.
So I do think it's very important when you're doing this kind of work, when you want to do this kind of work on yourself, that you find a listener who is non-judgmental and who will let you talk. Because sometimes the things that come out do sound awful. You know, awful, I'll do that in quotes. It wouldn't be stuff you'd talk about at a cocktail party. And it's not actually how you feel. It's just a thought that's running around. And the more you kind of go, sit down, sit down, sit down, the more it's coming up. Whereas often as soon as it's out of your mouth, certainly for me, as soon as it's out of my mouth, I'm going, oh yeah, no, I don't actually believe that one. That's just doing the circuit.
Yes.
So.
Oh, that is so true. You say something out loud and then you're like, wow, it sounded so much more like it made sense in my head. And then when I let it out, I can remember, Orla, and this has nothing to do with menopause, but I was next door and I had a chainsaw and I had scaffolding and there was a tree and I wanted to cut down this branch. And so I was like, yeah, it might be a little bit dangerous, but I could do this. And so I was like, I better Google it. And as soon as I said to Google, is it dangerous to cut down a branch over my head with a chainsaw? It's like, wow, because in my head a minute ago, totally fine, like calculating out loud. It's like, oh, that is not a thought I believe, and it is now gone, and I am not doing this.
Yeah, that's a brilliant example, because that is exactly the. Yeah. Jesus,
Yeah.
I'm glad you Googled.
Yes, thank you. But it's true. Sometimes when we say things, if we're in company that say doesn't have the tools or likes to jump on the bandwagon or what have you, it can actually be toxic, because then they're like, whoa, where'd that craziness come from? But it's just something that needs to come out. And it is part of that healing process. And it's part of that nurturing and carving new neurological pathways so that we can pass on proper, more healthy emotional environment and thoughts to our children and people around us and ourselves.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Mm.
So what is your favorite thing or moment about what you do? If you had something else to say, go ahead. I just wanted to ask that.
I was just going to say something that just popped into my head there, that when we're talking about healing intergenerational trauma, that what we're often missing is a mixture of age groups in our lives. And I always think it's interesting to kind of just mentally go through your friends and say, who do I spend time with who's significantly younger? And who do I spend time with who's significantly older? Because there's wisdom to be had from both sides. And I think, again, that's something that you have more of usually in a small community. But for those of us living in a big city without family around or what have you, you can often go a long time without spending time with someone who is a completely different age to you. I'm not talking 5 years here and there. So, sorry.
I'm really glad that you said that, because it's actually the exact reason that I joined to be a circle facilitator, because what we are missing in our Western culture is those generations talking to each other, where the women, when they turned into wise women after menopause, they would often pass their wisdom on to the other generations, and the communities would raise each other together, and it would be this cyclical process. And now, then we went into one parent working and one parent staying at home. So you still had a bit of it. Then we went into two parents working and kids raising themselves with other kids. And we've split that generational gap. And therefore, we've cut off that wisdom. And it is so important. And you don't find that anywhere. And so women's circles is somewhere that I find that you can have someone who is, like, for example, in my program, I have perimenopausal, not even in menopause, menopause, and postmenopausal. And the wisdom that we get in perspective is so different from all of them. And it needs to be shared.
Yes.
So it's such a good point. Thank you so much for saying that.
I noticed it when I came to Canada. So I was 22 and I had been teaching for 2 years in England before that in a small town. So there was still that sense of community. And then I came here and I was teaching like these lovely, lovely children, really nice parents. And a huge number of them were like me. They were immigrants over, but they had young children, but they didn't have grandparents and in-laws and what have you around. And I just remember at one point coming back to my friend who was also teaching with me and saying, like, I'm 22 and they're asking me what they should do about such and such. Like that's a conversation. And not that, so I wasn't judging them for it. My thing was, where is the support system? You know, you're supposed to be able to ask your mother or your grandmother or your mother-in-law about that kind of thing. And they might know, as opposed to, I mean, I'll give you my best guess because I'm really interested in children and parenting and all the rest. It's really only my best guess at that point. It's still only my best guess. Everybody's raising their own child and what have you. But I just remember feeling, this is a bit strange. This must be quite lonely for parents, and particularly for mothers of young children in this community. So yes, that's my that's my plug for intergenerational friendships to help with the intergenerational healing.
And thankfully, you grew up from a 22-year-old woman who is offering that connection that you saw that was missing in our society to bring that into the world. And thank you for that, Orla.
Well, thank you. And as you read earlier, I was missing it hugely.
Mm-hmm.
I would have loved somebody to say, actually, you don't have to look after everybody all of the time. Yeah. But then maybe I wouldn't have believed it. You know, maybe you have to go through your cycle. I don't know.
Yep. And now maybe now that passion, it shines through you and you're sharing it with everyone else because you did go through your own cycle. And here we are breaking that pattern.
Yes, yes. And I would really love other people not to have to go into that depth because it's intense. So, yeah. Yes. I'd love if we could break that pattern.
Say that one more time.
I would love if we could break that pattern of feeling that everybody else's needs are actually more important than ours, that we will look after ourselves when everyone else is looked after.
Yeah. And I wonder if we're hormonally set up that way somewhat during our mothering years. You know, we don't have the same hormones that we do when we're a child, and then those hormones disappear, and then we come to a phase where we're like, okay, I think there's a lot of grief that people forget to look at in knowing that they're moving into this other space, but maybe that's what this space is. I don't know if you can do it in the mother phase or not. Like, we can try to put it out there for the people, but then we're like almost forced in the pause to be able to be like, okay, you know what? It's my turn.
Yeah. I think that's so true. And I think it helps if you were by nature or by training or by experience a people pleaser, like if you felt you had to look after everyone.
Yeah.
I think that women often still continue to look after everyone, even when that cortisol has dropped down. Or it's not cortisol, it's I can't remember the hormone, you know, the hugging hormone. Is that the oxytocin?
Anyway. Oxytocin.
So when you have lots of that, you nurture and you look after people and you're reasonably happy doing it. When that dips and you're still feeling obliged to look after everybody, I think that's when the anger comes in.
Yes, it might not be oxytocin, but you are right. Yes, when we dip in some of our hormones, that's when the anger comes in. And probably from years of not being able to, because you are so busy looking at everyone else.
Yes. Yes.
So
that's my flagship. You wanted me to say the thing that I love best?
Yeah, for a minute, it just popped into my mind. I felt like I just felt like it was a question I should ask.
There is a moment in the journey with my clients. There is a moment where a dawning realization comes over their faces. It's like the sun comes up and they actually say, I am enough. And I can't even recreate that because it's said for the first time. And you see, it's like years come off their faces and their faces soften. And it's just that kind of realization and a willingness to say it, to verbalize it. And yeah, I get goosebumps. I just feel like a proud mama. Look, baby, off you go. You're flying. You have it.
You've shed the skin. You're ready. Oh, I love that. I'm so glad I asked that. Thank you for sharing that. And I can totally relate as a coach in those moments when they have that realization, whatever the realization is. It's such a beautiful moment. Wow. Well, thank you, Orla. I really appreciate you being here today. And I know right now it's 11:30. Before I say goodbye, did you have anything else you wanted to add?
I'd be afraid to get started again, Kylie.
Right? I know I could speak with you for hours. But I always put these into the group, and anybody who, resonates with you, they can reach out to you. They're saved in our guide section of the group, so they can, I'll put if you have a website or anything, I can put it in there, and then they can reach out to you. And you're welcome to post anything in here anytime you want that you think that feels right. And I know that this video is going to be very important to at least somebody.
Thank you. And thank you so much for having me. And for everybody who listens, thank you for listening. I don't take it lightly.
Yeah. Quick replay here to let us know you guys listen to it. We appreciate everyone watching this. And Orla, thank you so much.
Thank you. Take care.
I'm going to push the goodbye button, but we'll still be here. So bye, everybody in the Facebook group.